Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving into a really fascinating piece of analysis today, one that highlights a super stark contrast. We're looking at the ironclad financial stability of the United States government versus the extreme fragility of Wall Street. It is basically a tale of two completely different financial realities, and understanding how they interact is absolutely vital for making sense of today's economy.
So let's start with the big one. Can the USA actually go bankrupt? You hear it all the time in the headlines, right? Constant predictions that unsustainable spending will bankrupt the country or that the dollar is just doomed to collapse. But the analysis we're exploring today completely upends that premise, actually calling the idea of a U.S. government bankruptcy absurd.
Well, according to the source, it really boils down to a very simple difference in mechanics. The U.S. government issues its own currency. Because every single cent of U.S. government debt is denominated in U.S. dollars, the United States can literally always create the dollars required to make a settlement. It literally cannot run out of money to pay its own debts. Now, Wall Street? That's a completely different animal. Private financial markets, banks, and investment funds do not issue currency, meaning they are playing by an entirely different set of rules.
The analysis leans pretty heavily on modern monetary theory, or MMT, to explain this. It points out that a sovereign government issuing a fiat currency can simply print what it needs to settle its denominated debts. Now, traditional neoliberal economics might push back hard on the implications of that, but the analysis uses this framework to state what they see as a simple structural fact. The USA itself cannot go bust.
Section 1. Wall Street's fragile state. So, while the government might be structurally secure, the source argues that current financial markets are highly unstable, and the indicators they point to are genuinely alarming. Share prices are just hovering around all-time highs. Investment funds have an unprecedented proportion of their total holdings tied up in shares. They have shockingly low liquidity, meaning there's almost no cash left in their reserve accounts. And to top it all off, government bonds are actively being sold off just to fuel this continuous increase in share prices. The whole system is stretched incredibly thin.
And this isn't happening in a vacuum. This fragility is being totally compounded by severe external economic pressures. We're talking rising food prices, the mounting costs of servicing government debt, and surging prices for oil and gas. According to the source, the U.S. is practically losing an economic war on these fronts, with no immediate resolution in sight.
To put this into perspective, look at this number, $15 billion. That is the amount lost by just one single U.S. hedge fund back in July. It is a frankly staggering amount of hidden risk that's just quietly bubbling up in the system. The broader markets appear to have absorbed this particular shock without a full-blown panic, sure, but the analysis warns that just means the true trigger point for a wider crisis hasn't been hit quite yet.
Section 2. Searching for a trigger.
So what sets it off? The source points out a pretty chaotic list of potential sparks that could cause a massive loss of market confidence. It could be political, like unexpected actions by Donald Trump. It could be geopolitical, like actions by Israel. Or it could be purely financial, the collapse of a major institution, a sudden and steep drop in share prices, or maybe a massive accounting scandal involving a major big tech company. Honestly, the specific event almost doesn't matter. The big takeaway here is that a fragile system only needs one small spark to shatter confidence completely.
To really hammer home how detached things have become, the source pulls a striking quote from the Financial Times. They actually called U.S. financial markets nuts and said they have lost touch with reality. When prominent voices start promising that this time is different, the analysis reminds us it rarely is. Bubbles always burst.
Section 3. The domino effect. It is super easy to treat Wall Street like it's a completely separate universe from our daily lives, but the source outlines a very clear, logical domino effect. First, financial markets fall. Banks that lend money to buy shares lose their security, and hedge funds suffer major losses. This triggers a sudden, drastic crash in public sentiment. Because people feel less wealthy and more afraid, consumer spending rapidly drops. And finally, that sudden lack of spending drags the real economy directly into a crisis, creating this awful downward spiral of corporate bankruptcies and insolvency.
The source specifically points to that Keynesian concept of animal spirits. It sounds like jargon, but it just refers to our emotional willingness to spend money. When the stock market tumbles and pension valuations fall, even if you don't directly own stocks yourself, the general mood sours. We collectively feel less well off. And when that sentiment crashes, it translates a Wall Street spreadsheet problem straight into a Main Street economic crisis.
Section 4. The cost of inaction.
The source presents a deeply concerning timeline here. Think back to 2008, when the global financial system nearly collapsed. Governments around the world actively stepped in to bail out economies. But jump to the present, and the source argues that neoliberal ideology has entrenched this rampant belief that governments simply cannot afford to do this again. The resulting risk? Well, if a crash happens and governments refuse to intervene, we aren't just looking at a recession. The analysis warns we could talk ourselves into a full-blown 1930s-style economic depression.
If the financial system fails and the government does not step in to break the cycle, the real-world consequences outlined by the source are severe, and they're deeply personal for you and me. We're talking about massive potential job losses, huge reductions in everyday income, the depletion of your hard-earned savings, and falling pension valuations that could absolutely ruin retirement plans. The financial system can fail even when the government cannot, and the fallout lands squarely on everyday people.
The source emphasizes the sheer urgency of this situation using a very heavy historical comparison. This is like the summer of 1939 with a crisis about to emerge. The message here is that there's a profound lack of preparedness right now. Everyone is just pretending things are normal, while a monumental crisis is quietly brewing just over the horizon.
Knowing that the cost of inaction could be enormous, we are left with a really vital question from the source. How can we make existential changes to the way our economy works so there won't be a next time? It has to start with understanding that our government actually has the power to act, even when Wall Street fails. Thanks for exploring this explainer with me today, and keep asking the tough questions.